Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Som TV podcast. My name is Jason Wise. Well, there's a new wine film coming out. It's actually a couple. One from us called Ghosts of Napa Valley, which I've been talking about quite a bit. And then there's also one in theaters right now here in the United States called Widow Clicquot. It's going out in Europe pretty soon, too. The reason I wanted to talk about this film, I'm going to have the producer on today, somebody who spent many years trying to get this film made, is because there's another wine film. I am sitting here, I feel like every day, talking about wine movies and all of this, and rarely do we have one going into theaters that isn't one of ours. So I'm very, very, very excited to tell all of you. On today's podcast, I'm going to interview the producer of Widow Clicquot, the new film going into theaters about the story of Veuve Clicquot and the woman who founded it. Before we do that, I do want to tell all of you, obviously we have our own wine film, Ghosts of Napa Valley, coming very soon. You can get tickets for that at somfilms.com, and it will be on Som TV October 11th. So make sure you go to somtv.com to subscribe. Before I speak with producer Christina Weiss Lurie, I'm going to bring on Jackson Myers, who is the cinematographer, editor, and producer of all the films I have directed about wine. Jax, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
This is great. I dragged him out of edit right now because I wanted to have a conversation about wine films just in general, the whole concept of them. Jax, you have made every wine film that I've ever made, you've been a part of, and every wine film you've made, I've been a part of.
Yeah, that's right.
Just sort of done this together. Spoiler alert here, this movie's quite good. It's really well done. It's one of the great wine stories that had not been told. There's a book called The Widow Clicquot that had come out, and it's an amazing story of sort of perseverance of a young woman not allowing people to tell her no, and to get the wine made and to keep the domain and do things that are pretty, it's a great, somebody sticks to their gun story. And honestly, it's quite a good movie. But what does it mean that another wine film is coming? You and I have been on an island here for a bit.
I think it's only a good thing, assuming it's a good movie, which it is. The more wine films, the merrier over here. I think it's such a hard genre to make a film in because of so many reasons that we could talk about.
Yeah, I'm curious why you would say why would you say a wine film is hard to make? What's the reason?
Okay, first of all, I guess, we have to differentiate a little bit between a documentary and a narrative, because with the documentary, we are truly at the whim and will of nature and the cycles of winemaking and all these things. So to make a documentary in the world of wine takes a lot of patience and takes a long time to complete. So we've learned that the hard way. And
I think anytime you shoot outside, you're kind of screwed.
Yep.
She does talk about this later on, not to spoil my conversation with her, but you and I filmed in France dozens and dozens of times, and it can be quite wet.
Absolutely.
And I know that their entire film sort of changed because they're like, oh, it'll be this beautiful pastoral countryside. And instead rained a lot. It ended up looking like how I would imagine 18th century or even earlier roads, this is Napoleonic War times. Roads would look like in France when you have horses and, our cars don't poop, but theirs used to. So I think it was a real messy place. What do you think was the hardest wine film, most difficult to make that you and I have ever done? What have we done? We've done the 3 Som films.
Yeah, we've also done Cup of Salvation, and then
that's 4. Yeah,
the 4th, and now the upcoming Ghosts of Napa Valley.
And then hundreds of episodes on Som TV, episodes on
hundreds
Som TV
of
different
television episodes, content on wine on Som TV. Right.
We'll get to Ghosts of Napa Valley in a second, but what do you think was the most difficult film that we have made?
I have a hard time with black and white like this, but I think because my memory is so shit, I would probably put Cup of Salvation as the hardest to make.
The most recent one is the most difficult one.
But also, if you think about what we went through to make the first Som film, again, we're talking, it's just 2 different worlds.
Sure.
One was sort of more trying on our backs, and the other one was more trying to complete, I think. I think I would still maybe go with Cup of Salvation, even though it's just the freshest,
I would say, if you ask me, I would say probably Som 2, Into the Bottle, because of how many locations there were.
Yeah.
It was just nonstop. We were in Napa, we were in Italy, we were in France several different times. It was just so many variables and so many different trips kind of made it so.
The truth is, none of them were easy. Som 3 wasn't easy either. It was.
I don't know. I liked making Som 3. Som 3 was fun.
I love making all of them, but I wouldn't call a single one of them easy to complete.
But
Som 3, I think the harder part about that was just trusting in and the story on it and making sure that it worked in the end, Well,
I think that's now this is a perfect transition into Ghost of Napa Valley. We're trying not to spoil it since no one's seen the movie yet, but I think that was the most scary when you're waiting to see what's going to happen. I don't mean literally scary because it's a ghost movie. I mean, like, you have no freaking clue what is going to happen towards the end of this movie, which is going to bring me to my next question for you is Ghost of Napa Valley, try not to spoil anything here, but is it even a wine film? This relates to the Widow Clicquot in a way that I think there's a question of, is this an actual wine film, or is this a story about a woman's perseverance, or can that be within a wine film? So in our film is a ghost hunting movie, quote unquote, even though it's more than that, in abandoned wineries, a wine film.
I think it fits within the greater genre of wine films because without wine at its core, these haunted spaces wouldn't exist, right? They exist because they were once wineries. So I think also, going back to all the way to our first film, this first Somm film through the fourth and this, I mean, wine films hopefully are not just about wine, right?
I've seen some that are, and
it's tough.
Because, they're
and I think it's one of the reasons why there aren't many, because you have to find the other story, right?
Right.
It can't just be about the wine.
It's like, I think I don't talk about this often. It's not something that I bring up, but I had a conversation with Alexander Payne after, a little while after Somm came out, who made Sideways.
Yeah.
And he basically said the reason he sort of hinted to me that, no, he said directly, the reason our films were successful was because they're not about wine.
Right.
And, I'm not sure what Sideways is about, but it's about a lot of other things than wine. I mean, ours is sort of a bit of a horse race movie. You're trying to win. And that's why I think, and I really mean this, this is not a sponsored pod or anything like that. We reached out to the producer of this new film. It's not on Somm TV, Widow Clicquot. And I just wanted to talk to somebody else who had gone through this. And when they sent us the screener, I was like, oh, thank God, the movie's great. Thank God, it's actually good, because there are some that are, you don't want to sound like a jerk calling other people's work out, because we know how hard it is to make a film. But some wine films are just, they're tough to make it to the end. I guess that's kind of what you mean, right?
I think that's what I mean. I think you need to find the human story, the history, the wars, whatever it is that interests you. Where wine is the backdrop.
I mean, right now, I think, people ask a lot, what is there anything else left out there? And I think that this movie, Widow Clicquot, goes to show, I mean, Billionaire's Vinegar, that book has not been made into a movie, and that's a big one. I know it's licensed. Nobody's done anything meaningful with the Nazis in wine, in my opinion. There have been some movies that touch it, but I think it's an incredible story. What's going on in the Middle East and what's going on in Ukraine and all of this stuff, there's a way to put wine at the center of that. And I look at a lot of these stories, and I think wine has never been the center, much like any movie that appears to be what it is. I mean, a lot of baseball movies aren't necessarily baseball. They're about fulfilling a dream or trying to see something through, or in the case of Bull Durham or something, maybe just baseball. But
there's a few baseball movies.
There's a few baseball movies. But my point about it is the wine film can only truly become a genre if more people make more of them. So if you're listening to this and you want to be a filmmaker and make wine films, I will tell you, don't do it for the money. But make more, because we need more to get this genre solidified so we can talk about what it is.
I have a question. Do you think The Ghost of Napa Valley is a wine film? Do you put it in the genre?
What will make more people see it? I think yes, I do. I mean, literally, here's the premise. You have a wine writer, a winemaker at a famous Napa Valley winery, and a sommelier take an antique Ouija board into very abandoned structures and try to communicate with people that are supposedly haunting those structures. Now, no spoilers, that's the concept.
Yeah.
But so, it's tough. Yeah, it's a wine film. I think in the end, you'll be like, okay. But like you said, it takes place in wine country.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think so. I mean, is Bottle Shock a wine film?
Yeah.
So I would say that this is a wine film,
I agree.
I mean,
it's also a ghost story.
This film's more accurate as a wine film than Bottle Shock is, but I don't know if, it's not as good as Chris Pine's wig in that film. Any other thoughts you have on the genre of wine films before I speak with Christina?
No, but I'm happy to see another one out there.
I am too. Without further ado, let's play a little bit of the trailer for the brand new film coming to theaters, Widow Clicquot, right now.
Welcome to the vineyards of Vercy. the most beautiful in all of Champagne.
Francois willed the vines to me because he knew I would never sell. I will be continuing to care for them myself.
Wine is a very difficult vocation, my dear. You underestimate what it will require of you.
I know what it requires. I've been in the fields for years.
You have one chance. One.
I want our champagne to have structure, depth.
I do admire you trying to run things as you want, as a woman would.
A woman is forbidden to run a business under the law. Her vineyard should be placed in the hands of an experienced executor.
Was this the plan all along?
No, madame. It never occurred to them you would succeed.
And that with any luck, 100 years from now, someone will know that we were here.
Christina, it's an honor to have you on. From a standpoint of having made many wine films myself, I know this is a very exciting, strange, and wonderful place. It's tough to stay sober while you're filming sometimes, but so the new film, The Widow Clicquot, is just so audiences know, what's the story of this? This is one of the great unfilmed stories, and thankfully you guys have done it. What is the story of Madame Clicquot?
So there was a New York Times bestseller book based on Barbe Nicole Ponsardin Clicquot. That's the name of Veuve Clicquot. Her life story, written by Tilar Metzger. And I read the book, I don't know, somewhere close to 14 years ago, and immediately felt that this was a story that needed to be told. Barbe Nicole Ponsardin Clicquot, known globally as Veuve Clicquot, her story just seized my imagination. She was a fascinating, wholly contemporary woman living at a time when, I would say, building a business in 19th century France during the Napoleonic Wars was fraught with challenges. So it was really hard for women to succeed at the time, and with history sometimes repeating itself, I felt that this was a story that needed to be told. And I wanted to use the medium of cinema to celebrate this young entrepreneur. And yes, even though her story started 200 plus years ago, I think it's just as relevant today and incredibly timely. So that was the background of making this film. And this film had many starts and stops, as most films do.
Oh, yes.
And you know that as well as I do. She lived till she was 89. And so if I was making this whole film today, I probably would be opting for a limited series, really diving into the whole historical background. Obviously, her story started in Reims during the French Revolution, and you would have had that whole historical background, then Napoleon, then her marriage, and then becoming a widow, etc. But, the reality was this was probably script number 4 or 5, director number 4 or 5, actress, our amazing Haley Bennett, also cast specifically with this version of the film. And and the budget kept shrinking as times have changed. And my sales agents were like, well, you have to make it for this number. And that number was a third of what I had originally thought I would be making this film for. And obviously, it's very challenging to make historical dramas with minute budgets. But I was really lucky to have Haley Bennett and Joe Wright as my partners when we got the news that the financial film world has shifted. And we decided, and I asked Joe Wright, okay, how do we make this story? At this point, it was an origin story, and the focus were the pivotal years from when she got married, fast forward 10 years. And he said that he had to make Anna Karenina in a similar fashion, very low budget.
We should say that Joe Wright,
Joe Wright is one of my producing partners on the film.
Very famous
he's an
director.
Amazing film director. He did Pride and Prejudice. He
did Darkest Hour,
Atonement.
which is a personal favorite of mine. I love this film very much.
So he said, have Aaron Dignam, who's our screenwriter, readapt our script to one location and one location only. And let's find that there's the right location in France that is a chateau or a manoir that's similar to what Veuve Clicquot's home looked like and felt like just outside Reims in Champagne. And let's find a manoir that has a vineyard. And so we did. We scoured France and found this amazing location in Chablis. And Burgundy today looks much more like what Champagne looked like in early 1800s versus Champagne, which is so modernized.
Sure.
And we were looking for something as authentic as possible.
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, even just down to the way they trellis vines, it's really hard to do wide shots, all of this stuff.
Now, we didn't quite go to what it looked like in 1805, but we tried to be as authentic as possible.
Makes a lot of sense. So I always have this question because I have to work with a lot of brands when I make my films. How involved was Clicquot on this, the actual brand? It's a huge brand now. And we'll get to some of the things that Madame Clicquot had to do just to stay in business, keep going. And that's ultimately, this is a great movie about perseverance, especially a woman having to do this. It's an incredible story of don't give up, don't give up, don't give up, which
determination,
we really need.
Determination. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. But
there's an irony. This brand is so huge now. So I'm curious, did they come to you and say, no, or were they helpful, or did you even have to engage?
So when at the first version of the screenplay, I shared with the president of Veuve Clicquot, and we had a different director and a different actress, and the times were obviously very different. And I wanted Veuve Clicquot to be as involved as they wanted to be. And I didn't want it to be a film produced by Veuve Clicquot, but I wanted them to feel as welcome as they might have wished. And so we did a lot of research. The writer did a lot of research. Obviously, Tilar, when she wrote her book, had spent a lot of time in Champagne. We visited the incredible cave cellars where they store. These amazing date to the Roman times.
Carved out of chalk, just
made
incredible
out of
stuff.
Chalk. They're incredibly beautiful. And, we would have loved to film there. And I think we would have 12 years ago. But the brand has just grown so significantly since that we did not. But we did look for locations that were as close as possible to those kinds of caves. And by the way, those cellars exist throughout France. I mean, it's like a whole underworld connected with these incredible tunnels and caves.
Well, as a geek, I'm pretty proud you picked Chablis because at least the soil structure, I mean, it's different. And anyone, any wine geeks will yell at me for this. It's not the same as Champagne, but it does have, there is a limestone element and all of this that looks very similar.
And what's interesting is that one tiny corner of Chateau de Béru's land originally was Champagne. Now the lines have changed, the demarcations have shifted, but at some point, and I think probably around in the early 19th century, it was Champagne, part of it. So we felt really good about that too.
Yes, just
back
south
to
of the
Veuve.
Oval.
So we spent a lot of time with the historian of Veuve Clicquot, and we made sure that we looked at all the diaries that existed. I mean, Veuve Clicquot never really traveled. She got hundreds of journals sent to her. She was curious about the entire world, but everything got sent to her, came to her. So when we were limited with our budget and decided we were filming at the chateau, pretty much, and stayed there, we felt good about that because she never went to Russia. She never went to other countries in Europe. She did go to Paris, but she never really left France. And even though she became France's first female entrepreneur and then Europe's first female entrepreneur, and the brand, as you said, has exponentially grown and grown and grown, she stayed local. That was always really intriguing to me. I love that idea of someone who was really curious and at the same time grounded in her in what she knew and what she wanted to do. Her journey was to craft the finest champagne. I mean, I think that that's really what she wanted to do. A champagne that was consistent and had style, and that was inspiring.
For sure. Well, Europe was such a much more dangerous place than it is now. I mean, Italy would have just not unified yet, would have been unified shortly. But I mean, so many different city states. And you think about Rome is basically a giant part of the Vatican. It's just a different world. And going to Russia, man, you talk about the Napoleonic Wars, probably not the smartest time to go to Russia.
And yet that's the reason that we all drink Veuve Clicquot today, because the Tsar fell in love with her champagne, the nobles there too. And she was able, to get to sneak her champagne through the embargo and get it to St. Petersburg. And that was, that was incredible.
Incredible. So when you started this movie, were you a big champagne person, you and your team, or are you now, or are you like, get champagne away from me, I've had enough?
No. We can never have too much champagne.
Yes.
It's for me, the image of champagne is something of a celebration and special occasions and weddings and happy times. So I will always enjoy a coupe of champagne for those special moments.
So for the release, tell me about kind of what's going on with the film. Obviously, it's in theaters here in Los Angeles, where I am right now. What's happening with it?
So the film it came out July 19th in the US, and it's been in a number of select theaters around the country. Mm-hmm. And as of earlier last week, it's also now on VOD. So you can find the film on Apple, on Prime Video, on all the different VOD platforms. But It's still in theaters. And we were really lucky to have an incredible French crew. Caroline Champetier, who was our cinematographer, I would say is one of France's top female DPs. And so if you get to see it in a theater, you get to enjoy her incredible cinematography. I think that Veuve Clicquot's unwavering dedication and refusal to ever give up, really that origin story, and it has its universal themes that still resonate and should resonate today with young women.
Couldn't agree more. Honestly, the movie's fantastic. So I have another question. So Ridley Scott's Napoleon came out recently, which I know people have had their opinions about. I truly loved it, but Ridley Scott could probably make a baked potato and I would love it. But it was in English. It unsettled many French people. And they said, why would you make one of our great people in English and blah, blah, blah. What was the reception to making this film in English?
So the film opens in the UK on August 23rd, and our cast is all fantastic English actors in that.
I'm sure it'll go great. I'm just curious.
We chose to do the film in English because her story is a global story.
Sure.
And so we felt that it would have a much vaster reach if it was in English, spoken in English. But we also understood the importance of being as authentic as possible. And that's why we never conceived of filming it anywhere but in France, and never conceived of doing it without a 100% French crew, using as many HODs as possible. And in this case, all of them were French. An amazing French editor, an amazing French cinematographer. I had at one point a French director and then another French director. And in the end, it ended up being that we have Thomas Snapper as our director, and he's English and he's done an amazing job. It's just the nature of the beast. I would have loved a French actress who spoke great English, and we tried for 1 millisecond to go down that road, and it didn't work. So you end up making the films with the great talent that it attracts, and I'm really thankful for that.
It is funny. Films seem to sort of at least 25% make themselves. You don't get to. It's almost like raising a child. You really want them to do something, but they're going to push back.
There's the genetics piece, and then there's the
nature nurture type of thing.
The nature of the world.
Well, I mean, while you're on, I want to say the cinematography in this film is truly fantastic. It is really, really, really beautiful. And just as a person who does shoot things myself, I was very happy to see the time period not sanitized. It looks dirty, it looks gritty, it looks in inappropriate ways. And I was honestly, that was my biggest fear with this film, is I was going to watch it and everything was going to be nice and clean, because I've spent a lot of time in these cellars.
So you're gonna laugh. We pick the Chateau de Beru as our location, and the first thing that our production designer says is, "We are bringing in mud. We are bringing in dirt. We're going to transform the courtyard, which had a pristine lawn and gravel, into what it would have looked like in 1805. So flash forward, I mean, tons and tons and tons of dirt get brought in for that courtyard. And then we start filming, and the first week we film in October, mid-October. Lovely, the sun is out. After that, there was not one single day that it did not rain, and that the mud, that the dirt did not turn into a mud quagmire. And our actors, traipsing in their period shoes through the mud. It was just, we started laughing because we call it the mud film. Mud was everywhere, inside and outside. It didn't matter what we tried to do. We just all accepted it's going to be mud. And then we ended up doing a couple of reshoots in the spring, just so that we would be able to show the vineyards and the young vines. It still rained. I just laughed. I was like, okay, this is what it's meant to do.
Yeah. It looked like you put a lot of production design into making it look like there are horses tromping around, and it is the real way it's supposed to look. Look, I've spent more time in France than normal people ever should, or, I don't know about should, but, and, it can be a very rainy, place. It is also a country with some of the best light in the world.
Oh,
but
it's beautiful.
But I was very impressed to see that it looked the way in my mind's eye I was praying it was going to. So that was my first thing.
Our costume designer was like, oh my goodness.
She was probably very frustrated.
Every night, everything covered in mud. But she was wonderful too.
This is fantastic. So I hope that for the next year, you're not going to pay for any Veuve Clicquot. I hope you have a trunk full of it right now.
I wish.
Of course. Yeah, it never goes that way, does it? Christina, I want to thank you so much. We'll tell everybody where to get the film, where to watch it. You should see it in the theater. It is beautifully shot. It's made for a big screen for sure.
Jason, thank you.
Thank you, everybody, so much for listening. I want to thank my co-producer and editor and filmmaker, Jackson Myers, for joining us at the top. And I want to thank Christina Weiss Lurie for joining, producer of the new film, Widow Clicquot. I want to remind all of you guys, of course, our new film, Ghost of Napa Valley, is coming to theaters beginning September 3rd in Napa Valley. Tickets are at somfilms.com, and then going to Som TV on October 10th. But before that, go to the theater. Go and see this new film, Widow Clicquot. Support a film that took years and years and years to make and is very good. If you're a wine person, you're going to love this film, especially if you're into history as well. It's a really great story. All right, everybody, be safe. Drink some champagne. Why the hell not? We'll talk to each other next week. Bye.